Hello and welcome to a new webcast and podcast from the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden. My name is Hussein Askary. Today is April the 8th. We are still in with the situation in the Ukrainian crisis in Europe. There's a lot of tension, but we last week we discussed briefly, gave a quick assessment of the China-EU Leaders Summit, which took place on April 1st. Today, we are going to go a bit deeper into that, what happened, what are the prospects for China-Europe cooperation, and how the two sides can contribute to stabilizing the situation in the whole crisis, but also whatever happens afterwards, how would the relationship with both China, but also Russia and the EU, what will be the outcome and how things will turn out. Of course, we are focused on the Belt and Road Initiative and economic cooperation. This remains our main issue and theme, but it's not avoidable to discuss these other tense political matters. To do that, we have with us today Professor Michele Geraci. He's a professor at the Shanghai University and former Deputy Economic Development Minister of Italy. He's joining us from Rome. Welcome, Professor Geraci.
Thank you very much. Hello to you.
Yeah, you gave your assessment to the Italian media and other media about what happened on May 1st between the leaders of China and the leaders of the EU. What is your brief assessment of the discussions which took place?
I think the EU-China summit this year was much more, using the word of Commissioner President von der Leyen, sober, because the atmosphere was not very friendly between the two blocs. I do believe that unfortunately the geopolitical tensions and the ideology dominated this meeting, which instead should have been a meeting where the EU and China find path to do business together. The EU sometimes makes let's say the mistake to believe that they can do foreign policy, while instead the foreign policy is pretty much managed by the individual member states of the 27 blocs. That's why we have a Minister of Foreign Affairs in every country. And so the EU instead does economic trade policy, and that's what they should focus on. When they want to step into foreign policy issues, of course, that creates problem because China knows that the EU does not do foreign policy. And so whatever the discussion is, the Chinese side politely listens, but then they know that they need to talk to Mr. Di Maio in Italy, Miss Annabel Baerbock in Germany, and so on. And so this friction that the EU has within itself to wanting to do more than it should, more than it is supposed to, create problems, because then we do not discuss and solve the thing that we need to discuss, which is economic issues. So that's why I was very disappointed. I think the tone also of the statement by von der Leyen was not what the politicians should do. Again, we have issues and raised issue about Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Taiwan. By the way, nothing happened in Taiwan, so I don't see what the issue is about. Neither in Xinjiang, by the way, and human rights, as if the EU was lecturing China. China has many problems.
Yeah, we will come to.
We all have problems.
Right. We can come to some of the details of this because this was a bit serious in a way. But I mean, the President of the European Council, Michel, said that this is not going to be business as usual. And before the summit, the EU issued a press release which said there's only one issue in this summit, and it is Ukraine. And that was a bit of a shock for everyone because usually, you know, as you said, we want to discuss the economic cooperation, which is primary, and that this is the way to ease tensions, even if you have other problems. different viewpoints, but what they did in the EU leadership is they put the problems ahead and the solutions in the background. After the summit, I mean, we wrote an article which we put what both sides said after the summit about the discussion, and you could see, as you say, there's enormous tension, there's the big differences in view, but there was this very strange tone by the EU leaders. There was a press release which says the EU recalled that the international sanctions against Russia were imposed with the sole purpose of stopping Russia's aggression, despite the significant economic impact on the EU and its partners globally. Any circumvention of the effects of the sanctions or any aid provided to Russia would prolong the bloodshed and lead to even greater losses of civilian lives and economic disruptions. So the point was that China's continued cooperation, economic cooperation and trade with Russia will help prolong the war and more people will be killed, as if they are putting the guilt on China. Von der Leyen said, I mean, she was issuing a very explicit warning and making demands on China. And she said, quote, China as a permanent member of the UN Security Council has a special responsibility. No European citizen would understand any support to Russia's ability to wage war. So anyway, I mean, the tone is that China is helping Russia. They should stop economic cooperation and trade with Russia. Otherwise, they will be guilty by association. I think this was a bit of a
stretch. No, I think it was, let me be straight, out of order for von der Leyen to make such statements. And first, there is a technical error that she's making. We don't know that sanctions will stop the war and will stop bloodshed. So aligning sanctions with saving lives is something that indeed it's not proven. And in fact, our analysis suggests that this is not really the case. So she starts from a very wrong footing, assuming that the two things are connected. And then, of course, by extension, she said that anyone who would help circumvent those sanctions or provide financial aid to Russia, even by purchasing Russian goods, would finance the war and therefore be responsible for killing people. Now, if the two things are wrong, but there is something that I want to stress, that even if she was right, that buying Russian goods would finance the war, then the EU is to be blamed, because it is the EU who is threatening to put in sanctions, and the threat is also pushing commodity prices high. So Russia is making money at selling oil and gas at higher prices because of the statement of the European Union. So she's wrong. I don't think the two things are linked, but her logic is internally inconsistent, because if she was right, that sanctions or buying things from Russia the other way around help finance the war, then it is the EU who is not just buying things, but helping increase commodity prices and therefore bring more money to Russia. So I think the EU should really do a little bit of introspective analysis of its own role and the responsibility before telling other countries what to do, which is, by the way, no one in diplomacy tells other countries what they should do.
Right. I think the Chinese position, I mean, what we saw in the Chinese media and statements from the government, there was a very clear irritation, and they said that the President Xi Jinping said already during the meeting that the EU should follow an independent assessment of China, but also an independent policy. I think he was hinting at the fact that the EU is towing the line of the United States, and it's damaging its own interest by not having its own independent policy. But instead, he called for the EU to work on the basis of the two parties' own interests. So from your reading of working inside China, having a lot to do with China, how was the Chinese reaction to this?
Irritated. China, of course, has a different style in showing, let's say, emotions and views, just because they do not tend to interfere with the affairs of other countries. So I tell you from the inside discussion I had, because I was in Shanghai also not long ago, is that China is pretty much not listening and almost dismissing what the EU is saying on a political side, but is concerned that this tone and behavior on the EU side could impair business activities. And at the end of the day, this would hurt our companies, not much Chinese companies who pretty much can continue to do business in open markets like Europe and the West is. It is our European company that need the protection of our government when we do business in China, because doing business in China is a little bit more difficult than doing business in Europe. So why Chinese companies do not really match the help of the government in terms of political clout. You know, we are a free open market. China is less so, and so the attitude of the European Union that in a way alters and negatively impairs the relationship, political relationship between China and the EU, is a price that our company, European company, will pay when they try to do business in China. So it's really counterproductive. It does not achieve anything. It makes the Chinese angry for no reason, and it makes doing business for our companies more difficult.
Yeah, the Chinese president, his tone in the beginning was very, conciliatory. He said that several years ago, when he came to Europe, spoke at the European Union, he talked of a vision of building bridges all over Eurasia between China and Europe, and that this dream was, a priority to build all these bridges, which reflects the Chinese mentality that they think this is primary. What is primary is economic cooperation, cultural cooperation, business, and then all these other issues on political differences and political systems. This is secondary, but we have the opposite here. The political so-called values come first, and trying to impose those values on the others. But talking about the economics, I think one of the first victims of the conflict in Ukraine was this, which we have followed a lot in our work, is the China-Europe Express, the rail freight routes for shipping on land by railways, which goes mostly 95, 97% of the trade on rail between China and Europe goes through Russia and Belarus before it comes into Poland and the Baltic states and into the rest of Western Europe. So this was down by 50% in the beginning because of the sanctions. But then the sanctions, as you said, we are still buying gas from Russia. So the Russian railway and Belarus railway were exempted. They were exceptions to work with them to let the rail freight continue. But many companies in Europe, for political and ideological reasons, are refusing to use the Belarus and Russian railways, and therefore most of the traffic is stopped now. So this is one of the first victims of this whole situation. Of course, we're talking about Ukraine being a bridge between East and West. Now Ukraine has become a wall, like a new Berlin Wall or something between East and West. And the way people talk here is that because even in the summit, von der Leyen and the President Michel of the EU, they said there will be also accountability. That Russian leaders and they will be held accountable even if there is a peaceful solution. So this means that even after this whole Hopefully it will end soon with a diplomatic and political solution. By the way, there are negotiations going on, which nobody talks about, between the Ukrainians and the Russians, which everybody should support. But the European view is that even after the war is over, there will be no normalization of economic relations with Russia. Now, we have two problems. We have the East-West communication, as I said, with the railway. How will that work? How will the future of gas imports and so on work? But also China's relationship to Russia, because China considers Russia as an important partner. How the world will look like after, if we continue this political tension, putting these political, ideological, geopolitical viewpoints before any cooperation.
No, this is one of the things that worries me most, and I'm happy that you raise it, because even while we still have the military conflict and while people are still negotiating, we are not really worrying, and we should plan for how we want to continue our interaction with Russia after the war ends. And I share your concern. The European Union is raising the stake again at the bad time. While things are still raging, the war is still ongoing, we should not put more wood into the fire. We should work for diplomatic solution rather than threatening further sanctions, or, like you said, making people accountable. People are accountable anyway. We don't need the von der Leyen to say that if people make mistakes, they will be accountable. It is not the von der Leyen role to be a judge of the EU. So this putting wood into the fire really does not help. And I'm very worried as an economist, and I look at the economic exchanges, this will create a lot of problems. It could be because Russia is a part of Europe, is an integral part of the culture, the tradition, and even if it extends all the way to Asia, we do share things in common. We do not want, and it will be a big mistake for Europe, to completely sever the links with Russia, not just because Russia would anyway find its own way with the other 150 countries around the world, from India to Pakistan to Saudi Arabia, China, that would like to and continue to do business with it as it's normal. But it would be a loss for us, because geographically, you mentioned the trains, the airplanes, we would be cut off also from the rest of Asia. So you said Ukraine could be a bridge between East and West, but so is Russia. The geography dominates the exchange. If we were to take the route to try to punish Russia, like in 1919 in Versailles, we know what would happen next. It is not a good idea economically. It's not a good idea militarily. And so I do think, and that's why I actually would favor now continuous exchanges with maybe Russian economists, academics, professors, because I think like we do with China, when the government have problem with each other, we try to push more the people-to-people literature. In Italy, some university banned the courses on Dostoevsky just because it's Russia, which is completely out of control. It's the University of Milano Bicocca, which I will try to stop them from doing any business with any other international university. For me, any university that says we don't do course on Dostoevsky because he's Russian does not deserve to have any international partnership. So I'm making an effort to completely block them from doing business and representing my country in a way that is completely different to the tradition of university. That should be completely open and do not mix politics with literature of centuries ago.
Yeah.
So this is my worry, that we do not want to sever those cuts economically and culturally with Russia. On my side, I'm continuing and accelerating to study Russian language anyway.
Okay, that's interesting to hear. No, that's very important, because I mean we have a bit of a hysterical situation. I mean, even Tchaikovsky is being banned in orchestras, and
it's completely crazy.
Yeah, that's very sad. But as you said, we forget that it's not only Russia and China in this situation. We have many countries in the Arab world, in Asia, we have India, we have many African nations and South American nations who actually at least remained neutral. They did not take a position against Russia. And many countries in the Gulf, for example, the oil exporting countries who have a very tight cooperation with Russia on the OPEC plus, they refused to accept US and European pressure to stop cooperating with Russia, to increase the oil production to compensate for Russian, because that might collapse the prices of oil if you pump too much oil into the market. But we forget that there are many nations in Asia and in Africa and the rest of the world who do not have the same viewpoint as the European Union has concerning Russia and cooperation with Russia. Russia is a very important country. People think that Russia is a second-grade economic power. They only export oil and gas, and there are only rich oligarchs. But Russia has massive agricultural production now, which is necessary for the world. And also, Russia is one of the biggest producers of fertilizers and exporting fertilizers.
This is important because we talk about oil and gas, but also on the fertilizer. We in Italy are, heavily dependent on Russia too. So and the rest of the world too. So it will be a big problem. You mentioned, sorry if I interrupt you. If we jump to agriculture, a worry that has not been really discussed is the problem of countries like Egypt, and they rely on both Ukraine and Russia for cereal imports, and that would create, Africa does not need a food crisis. And this is what, again, you should be responsible and should be aware that raising tensions and creating more than it already is happening in Ukraine would create a big really big humanitarian problem in Africa. That is a social migration, famine, and so on. And this has not been, I don't know if people do the analysis or they just open the mouth without thinking. I think it's the second one.
Yeah, no,
they don't think.
Yeah, I think the politicians, they live in a different world than the people who deal with the economy, with industry. I mean, if we go to the real economic problems created in the EU countries themselves, I mean, we have the price of fuel, the price of electricity, the price of everything is going up. And people say, well, this is a price we have to pay for freedom and, again, fighting against authoritarianism, but the politicians are living in a different world than the people in reality. I mean, a friend of mine asked me to look if there are special type of steel sheets they wanted to buy from Sweden and in Europe for oil industry in a country. They just asked me, is it available? So I made calls to steel producing companies here. And they said, no, forget it. We are not producing that kind of steel anymore because of the crisis. And I asked, where can I find this? They said, there are only two places you can find these products now, steel products. Is it in India and China? So the Europeans, we are shooting ourselves in the foot by actually raising the cost of production here in Europe, and actually not being cynical. China will benefit from this because China will be able to compensate for the loss of European production capacity, because China does have a production capacity. But we are undermining industrial production in Europe itself. It's not only the prices of heating the home or electricity at home, but we have whole industries in Europe who are dependent on a cheaper fuel price, electricity price, and also on markets. So on economic level, I mean, this is very, very counterproductive.
And also, it is not just a cynical view that what's the price we need to pay for peace, which is not clear. And you're right, some people may prefer to pay, some people may not. The problem is that we pay a price without making any significant impact on the peace process, because I don't see sanctions working to stop the war. We put sanctions, it means that Russia does not get money, but the reason and we need to think about the economic sanctions in the past have never really worked for, regime changes or forcing any other political issue in Cuba or in Iran or others. For example, gas exports is only 55 billion US dollar for the Russian economy. So it's about 3.3% of the total Russian economy. The EU buys 75% of that, so about 2%. So we cannot, seriously think that if we stop purchases of gas and Russia GDP could take a hit, maybe 2%, which is not, even that is not safe because Russia may sell product to others. And in fact, Russia is already in the bag having 3 months of oil and gas sales at a higher price. So there will be no hit in the economy already. It is inconceivable in my mind to think that not buying 50 billion of gas or 40 billion of gas from Russia will make the war end. And we in Europe will pay an economic price. And the economic price will also undermine the political consensus in our European countries to insist on this route of sanctions. So we are, in a way, using a weapon, which is the sanctions, in the worst possible way, hitting our own economy, not hitting Russia. So we pay a price, not for peace, we pay a price and the war will continue. When finally some politicians come to senses and they realize that those sanctions don't work and they need to do something else, which would also be painful for us, by then the popular consensus will diminish because people will have suffered economically. They don't see the result. They don't see that this has had an effect on the peace process. And so the democratic government of Europe will have a harder time to impose further restriction on its own people in exchange for something that has not worked before. Now, we hope this will not happen. We hope that the peace will come anyway. But the peace, if it comes, it is because they are negotiating, not because we don't buy gas.
Yeah, there are 2 points which we still need to discuss. But the first is that some people say that Russia has already prepared itself by pivoting to Asia. You remember the summit between President Putin and President Xi Jinping on February 4th during the Olympics. There was a comprehensive strategic agreement signed, and everybody was saying that this was in preparation for this eventuality. There will be a war, and Russia was preparing itself, and China is backing it in a certain way. But Russia is probably, and now we saw that India refused to go to follow the pressure and not only increase their purchases of gas and oil from Russia, but they even accepted to do it in Russian currency, in ruble and in the rupee, which everybody say, oh, this is the end of the dollar system. I mean, we don't know. This is a speculation, but Russia has also, I mean, is trying to force Europe to use their own currency. Some countries are considering that in Europe, like Slovakia and Hungary. Probably they will have to do it because they don't want to suffer much more. But was Russia and China, in your view, preparing for this eventuality, or was this a long-term policy which coincided with this?
I think it was a long-term policy. I think it's under everyone's eyes that Asia will be the rising economic power in the world, and the West, Europe especially, little by little will have a smaller and smaller role. So it is a process been going on for many decades, and little by little people realize that growth is in Asia and hopefully also in Africa. So the economic, not geopolitical, the economic pivot to Asia was already there for Russia. Russia already exports and does a lot of trade with the Asian countries, more than the European countries do. So they have a higher share of interaction with Asian countries. As you know, Italy and me personally, we also pushed for Italy to be in the Belt and Road Initiative. because I do believe that this is a very good opportunity for not just for peace, but for economic exchanges, to really build physical and cultural bridges between those two worlds, the East and the West. So we do need to accept and take advantage of this rising Asia. So yes, I think Russia has prepared. They would have done it regardless of the Ukrainian situation. And I do think Germany, France, and many other countries have been doing it. Sometimes behind the scenes, sometimes not raising the voices too much, because real politics dominates. And let me say, dominates on what? We really have not much to teach any other countries in terms of how they should do business. So we have differences. Everyone decides what they want, how they want to do that, and we just have to live with the boundary conditions that we do have. But given these boundary conditions that may limit some interaction, even more so, we need to re-emphasize initiatives like Belt and Road, the building and the reopening up of rail routes, maritime routes, the Arctic routes that, by the way, will go over Russia, northern Russia in Siberia, as climate change melts the ice and makes those routes more available. So it's not just a geopolitical economic shift, but also a climate change shift that will make even northern part of Russia, like from Yamal to Norilsk and others, much more relevant in trade than they were before.
Right. Also, I mean, Russia is a huge country, and not only oil and gas, but you have all these minerals and metals.
Nickel,
Russia and Kazakhstan and China, I saw somewhere that they stand for between 50 and 90% of the production of all the rare minerals that are very crucial to industrial processes. I mean, Europe and the United States are totally reliant on Russia, Kazakhstan, and China to get these special metals.
So we are waging a cultural war on the countries that have energy that we need and materials that we need for both the green and technology innovation. It's not a good idea.
No. There was just the last point before we go to where we should be heading instead, with the idea of the Belt and Road and economic cooperation. Your team produced very interesting graphics and the data on how much Europe is reliant on gas and oil from Russia, but also the fact that the United States and Qatar cannot replace Russia physically in real terms. Not in the short term, not in the medium term. What is the alternative for Europe?
We did the numbers, so we know that Europe imports more than 150 billion cubic meters. The US has pledged to commit 15, so 10%. So we still have the other 90% that we don't know where to find it from, because like you said, the US has its own needs of gas. The other gas producing countries like Qatar, they've said that they will not send additional gas to Europe because they have clients in eastern part of the world, in Pakistan, India, Korea, Taiwan, and so on. They also want long-term contracts that we cannot do because we do not have visibility on our economy for the next 20 years. And so we don't know what we might need. And so that makes Qatar out. Norwegian and Dutch gas is either not good enough or not good quality. We have a pipe from Azerbaijan, which is 10 cubic meters, could go up to 20 in the next 3 or 4 years. Algeria, Libya are what they are, politically also not disaligned with Russia. Really, we have no alternative other than think of going green, more renewable, more coal. So we have gases in the middle, in the green and dark energy production. If we get rid of gas, because there is no replacement in the next 3 years for the Russian gas, and that's why I'm worried that we might have a big economic crisis. We have two other routes, opposite, back to coal or more to green. And this will create, of course, all the disalignment with the European push for green, because we are now considering to open up again coal plant to generate electricity instead of gas plants. So we are in a chaotic situation. And I again emphasize that people did not think what is the alternative before threatening not to purchase gas from Russia. They should have done the analysis on what the supplies are, both in the short and in the long term. If tomorrow Russia stops the flow of gas from Yamal Peninsula into Europe, we are in big trouble. We have no alternative. We lose some countries 20–25% of energy supply. And this is a big deal. Italy, for example, we import 40% of our gas comes from Russia. So we can have an overnight cut in that 40% supply. And that would create serious shocks into the economy, value chain, and so on.
Yeah, everybody was talking about Germany, but actually I was shocked by the numbers you presented about Italy itself. But if we look to Hungary, Slovakia,
they go even higher.
Czechia, they relied 80–90% on Russian gas. True. So this is I called it on a TV station. This would be a suicidal policy. And at the same time, I mean, like in Germany, they both want to shut down the coal and the nuclear power, which was not a very wise decision. Anyway, I mean, it's clear that the only way forward is to continue economic cooperation and trade and try to solve these political problems, strategic problems with negotiations and diplomacy. I think we agree that this is the only way out, but the economic cooperation, the realities of geography, the realities of physical economy are superior to these other differences, because it's in the interest of all the people to have good relations, including people-to-people communication, which has become a victim in this situation. But I think, to conclude, in a sense, the offer to do pragmatic cooperation with Russia, but also with with China, but also with Russia, and the idea of the Belt and Road being a modus operandi for this kind of cooperation, not only in Europe, but also in Africa and South America. I think everybody's talking about a new world order, but the problem is that what people see is not totally new, because if you have Russia and China and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and India and Africa going one way, and then Europe and the United States, this is not a new world order. This is the old Cold War. What is your vision of a better world order, which restores the United Nations Charter? Russia and China say, look, if we follow the United Nations Charter, everything will be fine. But
I tell you, my kind of dream solution is to bring Russia into the G8 again, because it's with interaction and communication that we can discuss. Diplomacy needs to step in, not step out. The foreign ministers should, this is the time that they've dreamed about. That's where their job is useful. When there are problems they need to solve, and instead they're doing the wrong things. They're raising stakes, they're pulling out, they're expelling diplomats, and so on. A big mistake. The Belt and Road, and I said the Belt and Road is always preferable to the tank road. So I don't want to see tanks crossing borders. I want to see goods crossing borders. And I really believe that, even the Belt and Road, for which Italy was criticized because the Chinese were to invest in Italian ports, now we probably could have had a little bit more spare capacity for importing gas if we had more cooperation with Chinese company to develop ports. And even the United States would have benefited from Italy having bigger ports, because they can sell us more of their gas, which now we cannot buy because we don't have the capacity. So this is an example that was criticized before, Chinese investment into ports, which is actually something that would have benefited even those who criticize it, the US and other European, because this is now where we would have needed the Chinese money to have developed, 2-3 years ago in advance of this crisis. So I think that the way forward is to continue people-to-people exchanges, cooperation, cultural universities, professors, events like these, talk to the people, communicate to the general people, because the problem is that the media tend to tell a different story. So it is important to really awake the consciousness of the general public in Europe to make them understand these issues. So we need to really make an extra effort to people like us to really go deeper down into all layers of the society and cascade down this information and make them aware that there are problems and that there are solutions, and because otherwise they live in a bubble of not just fake news, but in a parallel reality. And by the time they realize, it will be too late for them. So this is why exchange of knowledge goes pari passu with the exchange of goods. So, I don't have to tell you, this is the time really to push more back emphasis on the Belt and Road, because this is really what links the 3 continents.
Yes. Well, thank you, Dr. Geraci. I really appreciate your insights, your knowledge, but also your the optimism also you share with us. So we appreciate your time, and also we will have the link to your work, your team's work on all these matters below the video, and we are looking forward to having more productive discussions with you. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks to you.